second episode of the Raccoon Club podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of things. We're going to be talking about the fallout from the Nazi riots in Charlotteville, and we're going to be talking about concussions in sports and how now it's actually beginning to affect high school students. So let's jump into the Nazi riots in Charlotteville. You know you're having a bad day as a leader of a country when your party has to come to your defense about whether or not you're condemning Nazis and white supremacists. From Talking Points memo today, there's a great article about how Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, is now coming to the defense of Donald Trump and trying to convince people that Donald Trump was actually trying to be forceful against Nazis and white supremacists. You may remember yesterday Donald Trump came out with a really weak response to the riots in Charlotteville. He seemed to equivocate that there was multiple sides to these issues. He didn't call out white supremacy by name. He didn't call out Nazism by name. He didn't bother mentioning that there were people there with Nazi flags and white supremacist flags and white supremacist ideology. So Mike Pence comes out today to do some little bit damage control. And he said, "We have no tolerance for hate and violence from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or the KKK. These dangerous fringe groups have no place in American public life, in American debate, and we condemn them in the strongest possible terms." Well, a couple things. Number one, that's a great statement, but why did it take 24 hours for the Trump White House to issue a response like this? And why did it come from the vice president and not from the president himself? Why can't President Donald Trump ever say anything bad about the Russians, ever say anything bad about Nazis and white supremacists? He constantly struggles with this. In his original statement, Donald Trump did not specifically mention white nationalists. He instead condemned the, quote, egregious display of hatred, bigotry, violence on many sides. Once again, there were no many sides in Charlotteville. You had white supremacists, and then you had everybody else. That's not a many-sided debate. For whatever reason, Donald Trump has a perpetual problem in calling out white supremacy. And when your vice president has to come out and give the statement that you should have given, the bar is set extraordinarily low for you. We're not asking for much from President Trump. All we want him to do is what every other president in American history would have done in this instance. I cannot believe that it's 2017 and we're begging the President of the United States to say something bad about Nazis. Now, usually when something bad like this happens in a city, the first thing that usually happens politically is either the mayor or the governor of that city or state ends up giving the president a big hug, and they try to embrace each other politically to show a sense of unity, to show a sense of solidarity in these issues. That's not what's happening here. The mayor of Charlotte, Mayor Michael Singer, came out and said this: "Look, I think a lot of this speaks for itself. We saw the campaign they ran. We saw the folks they surrounded themselves with. We saw David Duke. People like that say a lot about the president. I'm kind of finished talking about the president." That's what the mayor of Charlotte said today. That's unprecedented when it comes to stuff like this. This almost never happens. This kind of lack of solidarity between a city mayor that just had an event like this take place in his backyard and the president of the United States, I cannot think of another time where something like this happened in American history, recently anyway. Donald Trump is dropping the ball on the most basic element of leadership. When you see white supremacy, when you see Nazis, say something bad about them. I don't know how much lower the bar can be for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said literally nothing bad about neo-Nazis or white supremacists over the last 24 hours, given the fact that one person died in these riots. How much lower can the bar possibly be? We are so screwed to have this guy as president. It is mind-boggling that we're putting up with this. In a series of early morning tweets Monday morning, Donald Trump did not mention the riots, did not mention white supremacy, did not mention the Nazis. Instead, he sent out a series of self-promotional tweets talking about how he's heading back to Washington from his 17-day golf trip to talk about to quote, focus on trade and military. He then sent a tweet about the Democrats, calling them obstructionists, and accusing them of having some of the worst trade deals in history, saying that he's going to change that. So again, 1 person dead, 19 wounded. The President of the United States has nothing to say about it. Unbelievable. So our next topic are how student brains are actually in danger now. High school kids are playing a lot of hockey, they're playing a lot of football, they're playing a lot of soccer. All these contact sports have been shown to do a lot of damage to brains, both young and old. And new research is actually coming out that you'd think should frighten people, but it's not. So according to The Atlantic, by an article by Linda Flanagan, in a recent study from Boston University, the largest of its kind, out of 202 deceased football players, scientists found CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's the degenerative disease that happens when your brain is subjected to repeated concussions. So out of 222 deceased football players, scientists found that 87% of them had traces of CTE. And what's worse, even the brains of young adults who had only played high school football showed mild cases of the disease. So CTE is actually a really horrible disease because it starts to degrade your brain. You start to lose your memory, you start to lose your motor functions. In many cases, you start to suffer from brutal, in some cases, violent mood swings. Many football players who were autopsied and discovered they had CTE committed suicide. A couple of them committed murders. They weren't able to think straight. They weren't able to control their emotions. Now, CTE is thought to be caused by repeated blows to the head. And the problem with CTE is that it's often only diagnosable in autopsy. There's no way right now to actually diagnose it purely on a physiological basis. So there's no test you can take. They are developing MRI scans that are getting there. But for the most part, you don't know you have it until well after the symptoms kick in some cases only via an autopsy when you die. So if that's not horrific enough, in 2016, Vox worked with a company called Morning Consult to poll about 1,800 registered voters about their attitudes towards a Super Bowl and football. And they found, and this is stunning to me, 87% of respondents had heard about the concussion problems facing the NFL and found that 67% of them were comfortable letting their own kids play football still. So 87% of people know that CTE is a thing. They know that the NFL is struggling with this issue, and yet 67% of them would still let their own children play football, would still let their own children be subjected to the repeated blows and the concussions that lead to CTE. This species is not worth saving. I cannot even, and if you think, and look, I think conservatives have a lesser IQ than progressives. I think the GOP is dumber than the Democrats. But even on this one, this is an equal opportunity idiot subject because both Democrats and Republicans, well over 60% of both, said they would still feel comfortable having their kids play football even after they know about CTE. Now, in fairness, the Tea Party voters are still the dumbest ones. 65% of them said that they would let their kids play football. No surprises there. But the fact that both Democrats and Republicans are polling at over 60% to let their kids play football after they know what CTE is mind-boggling to me. I cannot believe that we live in a country and we live in a world where parents are willingly allowing their children to go out and get their heads smacked around so that 5, 10, 20 years later, you have your child will be suffering from potentially dementia, from symptoms similar to Alzheimer's, from mood swings, from massive depression. I've said this before, our species is not worth saving. We are just too stupid as a species to go on. There's no point in doing it. Go home, turn off your radon detectors. Let's just all go to sleep and get this over with. Thanks for tuning in on this episode of the Raccoon Club. We'll catch you next time.